So if we reject the law, it's the same as rejecting the Son. The rejection of the Son is the same as the rejection of the Father. We are on the very verge of the final conflict, and the world needs to be warned. This movement is not to form separate congregations. This movement is to infuse all. So the world is seeing revolt. Well, who's engineering these events? It's not just happening in the Arab world, it's happening in Europe. It's going to come here. People are fed up with everything that's going on in this world. And this is the breach that needs to be repaired in the time that we live in. We can study prophecies, we can know what's happening in the world, we can see all of these things. If we don't start right here with Jesus, we've gone nowhere. I've titled this lecture Brass for Gold, and we're going to start off with the stories of the Old Testament and see whether there's an application. Solomon's apostasy is chronicled for our time. Solomon's apostasy led to untold evils in Israel. The hearts of the people were turned from the true worship of God, and syncretism crept in until they were steeped in idolatry, while they themselves considered themselves faithful in all their ways. So when syncretism, worshipping God in different ways, introducing Baal worship and other forms of worship, and dedicating them to God, and you're thinking you're on the right track and you're actually far removed from God, that was the problem that Israel had. And the Bible foretells a very similar apostasy at the end of time, where the people of God will be led astray like Jezebel led God's people astray by introducing the syncretistic worship of Baal and Yahweh. In 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 1, King Solomon loved many strange women. Of course, a woman in the Bible is a church. And King Solomon stands for the head of God's church, together with the daughter of Pharaoh. So she's mentioned as well. So not only did he like antitypically churches, but he also introduced an Egyptian mindset. So the church at the end of time could have ecumenical relations, but it could also teach evolution, a secular mindset. And the women, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Edomites, the Zidonians, and the Hittites. So sister churches, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, and also foreign religions. So there was room to embrace them all. And this is the mindset that the Christian church in general has, and this is a mindset that even threatens to enter into the very realms of God's church. So the king of the north seems to want to put his foot even in God's church. But in this lecture, I'm not going to deal so much with God's church as with the Christian church in its entirety. 1 Kings 11:2, of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, you shall not go into them, neither shall they come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. But Solomon clave unto these in love. He felt he just had to liaise with them. So this decline of Solomon is documented so that we can learn from his experience. The decline was gradual, almost imperceptible. It has a habit of sneaking up on you, sin. So it spins its web one strand at a time until you're finally fully engulfed. Solomon loved the Lord in his youth, and he made a choice to follow him with his whole heart, and his early reign was exemplary. We read in the book Prophets and Kings, above every earthly good, the king desired wisdom and understanding. And here's this famous picture of the ladies and the little baby to demonstrate his wisdom. He longed for quickness of mind, for largeness of heart, for tenderness of spirit. And then the Lord appeared to him in a dream. And the Lord answers, Thou hast showed unto thy servant David, my father, great mercy, is said, according as he walked before thee in truth and in righteousness and in uprightness of heart with thee. And thou hast kept for him this great kindness. Thou hast given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. See, God, it says to him, ask what I shall give thee. And the answer was, give me wisdom to lead this great nation. And God granted him so much more. He gave him everything else that he didn't ask for. And now, O Lord my God, thy heart has made thy servant king instead of David my father, and I am but a little child. I know not how to go out or come in. And thy servant is in the midst of the people which thou hast chosen, the great people that cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy so great a people? And God took this humility, and God gave him what he wanted. And the Christian church was like that. The Christian church started off with such wisdom, such discernment. And what happened to it? What happened to it? And then God called it back again out of spiritual darkness, and Protestantism was so full of wisdom and so full of discernment. And what happened to it? And God said unto him, because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither asked riches for thyself, nor asked the life of thine enemies, but hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment. Behold, I have done according to thy words. I have given thee a wise and understanding heart. And he became the wisest of all the kings. He could discern everything. How could it happen that apostasy could creep in and he could fall from this height? And if thou wilt walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments as thy father David did walk, then I will lengthen thy days. So promises are conditional. But then the rots set in. Steps to apostasy. The first thing that happened eventually, he got so many accolades that self-confidence started creeping in. Solomon had begun to lose sight of the source of his power and glory. As inclination gained the ascendancy over reason, self-confidence increased. We have to be very wary that we do not become self-sufficient. We must always remember that without Christ we can do nothing. And he sought to carry out the Lord's purposes in his own way. I know how to do this. And then you lose the counsel. He reasoned that political and commercial alliances with the surrounding nations would bring these nations to a knowledge of the true God. I've come across this so often in my ministry. You're not supposed to evangelize like this. You must do it differently. You must associate. And I do know that you have to associate, but you have to become part of them, they then say. And I say, well, has it worked? Well, not yet. But if you associate, eventually your mindset becomes their mindset, or their mindset becomes yours. And then you lose it. So self-confidence is the first problem. And then you step into unholy alliances. As he entered into unholy alliance with nation after nation, often these alliances were sealed by marriages with heathen princesses. So you are adopting the principles, you are incorporating it into your own setting. The third point was setting aside God's requirements for those of the world. Then you are on dangerous ground. The commandments of Jehovah were set aside for the customs of surrounding peoples, and he started to worship in their style. He still worshiped the God he knew, but he worshipped him in their style. And that's syncretism. The following step is flattering himself that his wisdom would prevail. Eventually, they would all come to understand the God of the Bible. Solomon flattered himself that his wisdom and the power of his example would lead his wives from idolatry to the worship of the true God, and also that the alliances thus formed would draw the nations round about into close touch with Israel. Vain hope! Vain hope! Solomon's mistake in regarding himself as strong enough to resist the influence of heathen associates was fatal. And fatal to the deception that led him to hope that notwithstanding a disregard of God's law on his part, others might be led to revere and obey its sacred precepts. So this was the gradual decline. And I asked the question, don't we, as a people, do the same things? The next problem was relishing worldly honor. Gold of Ophir. The king's alliances and commercial relations with heathen nations brought him renown, honor, and the riches of the world. He was enabled to bring gold from Ophir and silver from Tarshish in great abundance, and the king made silver and gold at Jerusalem as plenteous as stones and cedar. Trees made he as the sycamore trees that are in the vale for abundance. 2 Chronicles chapter 1 verse 15. So he became rich. Wealth with all its attendant temptations came in Solomon's day to an increasingly large number of people. But the fine gold of character was dimmed and marred. And then eventually when you become so steeped in all of this, then you start losing confidence in God's guidance. So gradual was Solomon's apostasy that before he was aware of it, he had wandered far from God. And this was a slow, imperceptible process. And more he relied upon his own strength, and they made their own decisions, and he didn't take into account the counsels of God. And when you get to that point, then blatant disobedience starts creeping in. Little by little, he withheld from God that unswerving obedience, which was to make Israel a peculiar people. And then he conformed to the customs of the people around them. Don't we do that in Christian worship? Don't we bring that into our midst, which should stay outside of our midst? If we think of music and worship styles and all of these issues, we as Christians are on the same slippery slope. He also had an unhealthy ambition. An ambition to excel all other nations in power and grandeur led him to pervert for selfish purposes the heavenly gift, hitherto employed for the glory of God. So we think we are wonderful, and even think that we might be the great philanthropists of the world and to get renown in that way. The Bible says, if you do your good deeds, do them secretly, so that your Father in heaven may give you the honor. Less regard for others, the money which should have been held in sacred trust for the benefit of the worthy poor and for the extension of principles of holy living throughout the world, was selfishly absorbed in ambitious projects, and he started building and showing his pomp and his glory. And today they buy the best sites to be seen. Character development is marginalized, engrossed in the overmastering desire to surpass other nations in outward display. The king overlooked the need of acquiring beauty and perfection of character. So religion starts becoming a form, an outward display. And you have your super singers, and the congregation, well, they perhaps don't sing so well. Let's have I call them the pineapple girls. You know, they all have these big speakers with these pineapple things on top, and they will do the singing, and display becomes important. Not that good singing from the front is wrong, but when display takes the place of heartfelt worship, then we are in trouble. Benevolence turns to tyranny. Once you have that kind of power, then you will maintain it with your decrees. Enormous revenues acquired through commerce with many lands was supplemented by heavy taxes. Pride, ambition, prodigality, indulgence bore fruit in cruelty and exaction. And his people were disenfranchised. So he had come from this wisest and most merciful of rulers, he degenerated into a tyrant. And the one who was once compassionate, the people feared him. And then he had no control over his passions anymore. Passion for power as a safeguard against dependence on the arm of flesh. The Lord had warned those who should rule over Israel not to multiply horses to themselves. But in utter disregard of this command, Solomon had horses brought out of Egypt. And they brought unto Solomon horses out of Egypt and out of all the lands, and he gathered together chariots and horsemen, had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen. And here he was, displaying his power, so that he could rely on the power rather than on God. And his other passion was that for women. Beautiful and attractive women were brought from Egypt, Phoenicia, Edom, and Moab, and from many other places, and these women were numbered by the hundreds. He surrounded himself with these women, and he absorbed their religion and their rituals. And that was idolatry. Their religion was idol worship. They'd been taught to practice cruel and degrading rites, infatuated with their beauty. The king neglected his duties to God and to his kingdom. Prophets and Kings, page 56. His wives exerted a strong influence over him and gradually prevailed. And now he gave himself up to the worship of false gods. And the Bible records that he worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. But he fooled himself that he was still worshipping Yahweh, and that all of these would come to see his point of view. And so today in the ecumenical councils of the world, when we liaise with all the women that apparently are beautiful, the churches, we fool ourselves that their worship style will come round to ours, when the truth is that ours comes round to theirs. And eventually your conscience is seared and you do not even see the difference anymore. So here is the one who prayed, "Give me discernment," and he ends up without any discernment. Solomon's course brought its sure penalty. His separation from God through communication with idolaters was his ruin. As he cast off all allegiance to God, he lost the mastery of himself. His moral efficiency was gone. He became blunted. His conscience was seared. He even became effeminate. Moving in those circles, doing what his wives wanted, he became more like them. And he had statues made of all of these deities. There is a way that seems right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Proverbs 14, verse 12. In later years, departed so far from purity as to countenance licentious, revolting rites connected with the worship of Chemosh and Ashtoreth. This is incredible. He mistook license for liberty. He tried, but at what a cost, to unite light with darkness, good with evil, purity with impurity, Christ with Belial. You cannot do it. You cannot serve both God and Baal at the same time, hoping that people will accept God rather than Baal. And then your nobility is lost. That which God has called you for, you do no longer reflect. From being one of the greatest kings that ever wielded a scepter, Solomon became a profligate, the tool and slave of others. His character, once noble and manly, became enervated and effeminative. His faith in the living God was supplanted by atheistic doubts. Unbelief marred his happiness, weakened his principles, and degraded his life. It is a miracle of God that this king came round in the last seconds of his life. Yes, poor, frail human nature. God can do little for men who lose their sense of dependence upon him. And this is the basic issue. If we think we can do it ourselves, we will lose out. And this mindset of the worldly women, worldly churches, will creep in and take over. So in the midst of prosperity, that is where danger lurks. Throughout the ages, riches and honor have ever been attended with peril to humility and spirituality. Once churches become affluent, once persecution ceases and you become prominent and you can be seen with your robes, well then, this sets in. There lurks a danger. It is not the empty cup that we have difficulty in carrying. It is the cup full to the brim that must be carefully balanced. Oh, this is wise counsel. Affliction and adversity may cause sorrow, but it is prosperity that is most dangerous to spiritual life. Unless the human subject is in constant submission to the will of God, unless he is sanctified by the truth, prosperity will surely arouse the natural inclination to presumption. In the valley of humiliation, where men depend on God to teach them and to guide their step, there is comparative safety. You know, that is why God called his people into the wilderness. Because in the wilderness, you are dependent upon God. This is what God wants to do. So how did God deal with this state of mind? How did he call him back? So the Lord raised up adversaries against him and promised to tear the kingdom from him. So this adversary might bring people to their senses. And I'm praying that when the time gets tough, that many people that now are just like Solomon might come to their senses. Notwithstanding, in thy days I will not do it for David thy father's sake, but I will rend it out of the hand of thy son. That's what God had said to him. Howbeit, I will not rend away all the kingdom, but will give one tribe to thy son for David my servant's sake, and for Jerusalem's sake which I have chosen. So here are the adversaries which were raised up against Solomon. And it's interesting that they were relatives, close people, outsiders, and insiders. So he had trouble from all sides. They were Hadad, the Edomite, who had fled to Egypt when Joab had killed all the males in Edom, and he made an alliance with the king of Egypt. And he was married to the sister of Pharaoh's wife, so he became family with Egypt. So he had some power behind him. And he returned to Edom after the death of David to be a thorn in Solomon's side. The second adversary was Rezon, who reigned over Syria. And the third was Jeroboam, the Ephraimite, who rebelled against him, and later ruled over the 10 tribes that were torn from the kingdom of Solomon. This was after Solomon's time. It's interesting that Jeroboam's mother's name was Sarua, which means leprous, and served as a symbol of sin. So the kingdom was torn away from his lineage in the time of his son. And God had promised that this would happen. Now, the question is, why did God permit this? 1 Kings 11:33, because they have forsaken me and have worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, Milcom, the god of the children of Ammon, and have not walked in my ways and do that which is right in my eyes and to keep my statutes and my judgment, as did David his father. If you practice syncretism, then this will be your lot. Now, history tells us that Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam. But of course he fled to Egypt and allied himself with Pharaoh Shishak. And he returned after the death of Solomon and tried to make peace with Rehoboam. But you know the story. Rehoboam took the counsel of the young men and he refused to take the counsel of the old men. And he decided to put a greater burden upon these people. And so the kingdom was rent from him. So listening to the advice of the young men, he doubled the yoke on the neck of Jeroboam. But Jesus says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest, because my people have forgotten me. They have burnt incense to vanity, and they have caused them to stumble in their way from the ancient paths, to walk in paths in a way not cast up. So if we want to make right with God, we need to go back to the ancient paths. And we need not follow the course of history. That is the story of David and Solomon and Rehoboam. Now Jeroboam not only took 10 of the tribes with him, but he tried to invest with solemnity a false system of worship to counterfeit the true. And here was a constant source of conflict. 1 Kings 12:26, and Jeroboam said in his heart, now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. He was afraid that those that he had separated would follow the dictates of the Bible and go to Jerusalem, and then they would return to the house of David. And so he stopped that by preventing it and setting up a counterfeit system and a counterfeit altar. If this people go up to sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then shall the heart of this people turn again unto their Lord, even unto Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they shall kill me and go again to Rehoboam, king of Judah. So he took counsel, and he made the 2 calves of gold, and he set up an altar. And behold thy gods, O Jerusalem, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And he set the one in Bethel, and the other put he in Dan. And this thing became a sin. For the people went to worship before the one, even unto Dan. So here's a counterfeit religion. And the whole of Israel is led astray. The interesting story of the prophet that rebuked and prophesied against the counterfeit altar is recorded in 1 Kings 13:4. And the king stretched out his hand against the prophet, and his hand withered. When King Jeroboam heard the saying of the man of God, which had cried against the altar in Bethel, that he put forth his hand from the altar, saying, lay hold on him. And his hand which he put forth against him dried up, so that he could not pull it in again. The altar also was rent, and the ashes poured out from the altar, according to the sign which the man of God had given by the word of the Lord. It's interesting that every time apostasy creeps in the nation of Israel, God sends a prophet, and then it goes well for a while, and then they slip right back down. It's also interesting that this very altar is the one that Josiah later desecrated, and we'll look at that in another typology later on. And his hand which he put forth against him dried up, so that he could not pull it in again, says 1 Kings. So Jeroboam had been filled with a spirit of defiance against God. He put forth his hand from the altar, cried out, lay hold on him, and God instantly rebuked it. So there are times when God miraculously intervenes in apostasy, but it didn't help over the long run. because eventually they all fell away and they were all taken into captivity. And then the king appealed to the prophet to intercede, and the man of God besought the Lord, and the king's hand was restored to him again and became as it was before. We read in the spirit of prophecy that Jeroboam's efforts to invest with solemnity this altar and this false system of worship was a total failure. It didn't work. You cannot worship Yahweh and Baal at the same time. So how is it possible that with all this information at our disposal, it is still possible for the enemy to bring in his false teachings and his false system of worship into the Christian church and even into God's final remnant church? The Lord seeks to save, not to destroy. He delights in the rescue of sinners. As I live, says the Lord God, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked. By warnings and entreaties, he calls the wayward to cease from their evil doings and to turn to him and live. He gives his chosen messengers holy boldness, that those who hear may fear and be brought to repentance. And then it tells the story of this messenger who rebukes even kings. And maybe that is what needs to be done in this day and age as well, because there are many, many kings today that are worshipping at the altar of Jeroboam. Now, the reign of Rehoboam is also fascinating in its typology. Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, reigned in Judah, we read in 1 Kings, and he was 41 years old when he began to reign. His mother's name was Naamah, an Ammonitess. Her name means pleasantness. But she was a foreign lady. So she didn't have the principles of God's people. Judah did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they provoked him to jealousy. And eventually the same thing happens, and God intervenes and rebukes them. They built high places, they put the images there, and they even allowed the Sodomites entry into their worship system. So they included the pagan rites of sodomistic worship even in the worship of Yahweh. How far can you fall from the real thing? This is the picture of the council of the elders that he refused to listen to. Although Solomon had longed to prepare the mind of Rehoboam, his chosen successor, to meet with wisdom the crisis foretold by the prophet of God, he had never been able to exert a strong molding influence for good over the mind of his son. And he had the character of his mother, the Ammonitess, the stamp of a vacillating character. And he led the people into apostasy. And the final apostasy at the end will be typological. Now we read in 2 Chronicles, and it came to pass when Rehoboam had established the kingdom and had strengthened himself, he forsook the law of the Lord and all Israel with him. So if a great prominent leader makes a decision, why is it that so many people follow blindly? This is such a bane in Christianity. And it came to pass that in the 5th year of the king Rehoboam, Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem because they had transgressed against the Lord. And he came with a mighty army, thousands of horsemen, and many nations with him, and he took the fenced cities, and he came to Shemaiah the prophet to Rehoboam, or the prophet came to Rehoboam and the princes of Judah, and they were gathered together in Jerusalem because of Shishak, and they were afraid. And then they repented, and God allowed Shishak to take over, but not to so totally destroy them. They humbled themselves. And when the Lord saw that they had humbled themselves, He said, I will not destroy them, but I will grant them some deliverance. Nevertheless, they shall be his servants. And they had to serve the Egyptian. It came to pass in the 5th year of King Rehoboam that Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. And he took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house. And he even took away all the shields of gold which Solomon had made. So the glory of the temple was taken away. All the gold was removed and it was taken to Egypt. And then King Rehoboam made in their stead shields of brass and committed them to the hands of captains of the guards which kept the door of the king's house. And it was so that as oft as the king went into the house of the Lord, the guard bare them and brought them back into the guard chamber. But throughout his reign he had conflict. Now isn't it interesting that he took better care of the brass shields than he did of the gold shields? So he made this brass shield, and then he gave it to the captains of the guard who had to watch these shields. And when they were displayed, afterwards they had to be locked away and they were protected. And so it is with us. We sometimes are satisfied with shields of brass rather than shields of gold. And sometimes we make such a display of our shields of brass when actually we have a second-rate religion and it could have been gold. And that is what I'm afraid has happened to the Christian world. And Rehoboam slept with his fathers and was buried. Sad story. Psalms 45 verse 6 says, Thy throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of thy kingdom is a right scepter. Thou lovest righteousness and hatest wickedness. Therefore God, thy God, has anointed thee with the oil of gladness above thy fellows. All thy garments smell of myrrh and aloes and cassia out of ivory palaces whereby they made thee glad. King's daughters were amongst thy honorable women, and upon thy right hand did stand the queen in gold of Ophir. This is a reference to Jesus Christ. This is his bride. Here are the women, the churches. Solomon was a type of the great antitype, Jesus Christ. But of course, the churches that embrace Jesus Christ are righteous, but his bride is in gold of Ophir. She doesn't have clothing of brass. She has the real, heartfelt religion, the righteousness of Christ. Hearken, O daughter, and consider and incline thy ear. Forget also thine own people and thy father's house. So shall the king greatly desire thy beauty, for he is thy Lord, and worship thou him. If we want to worship God, brass is not good enough. Even if we make a pomp and display of it. Christ's bride is covered in gold of Ophir, the symbol of the righteousness of Christ. Brass doesn't cut it. Above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith ye shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked. Our faith is based on nothing less than Jesus and his righteousness. And our faith must be based on the Word of God, because the Word says so, therefore it is so. But we are inclined to put shields of brass where faith is supposed to be. The Bible uses these sad words in the case of Rehoboam, all Israel with him. It is so difficult to understand why apostasy is so popular. It came to pass when Rehoboam had established the kingdom and had strengthened himself, he forsook the law of the Lord, and all Israel with him. So the extravagance of Solomon's reign during his apostasy had led him to tax the people, And had Rehoboam and his inexperienced counselors understood the divine will concerning Israel, they would have listened. They would have had that discernment. If he had prayed for discernment like his father had prayed for discernment, he might have done the right thing. The pen of inspiration has traced the sad record of Solomon's successor as one who failed to exert a strong influence for loyalty to Jehovah. He was headstrong, he was confident, he was self-willed. These are the problems that arise. I counsel thee to buy of me gold. Over and over the Bible brings this out. And in order to distinguish between brass and gold, we need discernment. We need to understand when is a doctrine, when is a worship style, when is a theology, when is an eschatology, when is it brass and when is it gold? Because we must buy gold tried in the fire, that thou mayest be rich, and white raiment, the righteousness of Christ, that thou mayest be clothed, and that the shame of thy nakedness not appear, and anoint thine eyes with eye salve, that thou mayst see. How sad, how filled with significance the word, and all Israel with him. The people whom God had chosen to stand as a light in the surrounding nations were turned from their source of strength and seeking to become like the nations about them. As with Solomon, so with Rehoboam. The influence of wrong example led many astray. We do not have to read the entire quote, but the essence of the matter, the serious of the issue. With the rending of the kingdom early in Rehoboam's reign, the glory of Israel began to depart, never again to be regained in its fullness. At times during the centuries that followed, the throne of David was occupied by men of moral worth and far-seeing judgment, and under the rulership of these sovereigns, the blessings rested upon the men of Judah were extended to the surrounding nations. At times, he was exalted above every false god, and his law was held in reverence. And at other times again, the reverse took place. This is the story of the history of Israel. So what is the application? We read in the writings of the spirit of prophecy, I am filled with sadness when I think of our condition as a people. The Lord has not closed heaven to us, but our own course of continual backsliding has separated us from God. Pride, covetousness, love of the world have lived in the heart without fear of banishment or condemnation. Grievous and presumptuous sins have dwelt amongst us. And yet the general opinion is that the church is flourishing. We're doing great. And that peace and spiritual prosperity on all her borders, the church has turned back from following Christ, her leader, and is steadily retreating towards Egypt. He loved the foreign women and the princess of Egypt. Yet few are alarmed or astonished at their want of spiritual power. Doubt and even disbelief of the testimonies of the Spirit of God are leavening our churches everywhere. Satan would have it thus. Testimonies, volume 5. I want you to note this quote from the Desire of Ages. The government under which Jesus lived was corrupt and oppressive. On every hand were crying abuses, extortion, intolerance, and grinding cruelty. Yet the Savior attempted no civil reforms. Please note this. He attempted no civil reforms. He attacked no national abuses, nor condemned the national enemies. He did not interfere with the authority of administration of those in power. He who was our example kept aloof from earthly governments. not because he was indifferent to the woes of men, but because the remedy did not lie merely in human and external measures. To be efficient, the cure must reach men individually and must regenerate the heart. If we lose hold of the gospel message, which can regenerate the heart, we're in trouble. If our gospel is diverted to a gospel of social justice and a correction of inadequacies and unequalness, well, then we are fighting on the side of Rome and not on the side of Jesus Christ. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be concerned about these issues. Jesus was concerned about these issues, but this was not his gospel. His gospel was an individual gospel, which was to reach the individual heart. Now today, the king of the north has his tentacles everywhere. And if we think the Protestant world is in any way safe from the king of the north, then I have news for you. And that statement that we read, that he will plant his tents even in Jerusalem, is scary. That means his mindset is even amongst God's remnant. He has set up so many structures, so many front organizations and affiliations, that to unravel them would be impossible. We need to know the gospel. We need to know what it is about, so that we can distinguish brass from gold. Our faith must be rooted in Jesus and his truth, and we are to rest in him, and will soon come to separate. He will soon come to separate the sheep from the goats. This is a final decision. This is an important issue. People believe that the women out there are fine as long as they come from the Ammonites, the Moabites, or the Edomites, because they at least are sister relationships. They have some Abrahamic blood in them. The sister churches will be fine. Protestantism, surely we can liaise with Protestantism. There shouldn't be a problem with that. Well, let's have a look at what's happening in the Protestant world. This is Norman Geisler, and this is an interesting article. Jesuits beget Jesuits. Norman Geisler, Veritas and Calvary Chapel Bible College. They are two different Bible colleges. And these colleges that are being set up all over the world, Protestants believe that evangelicals are in control of these issues. Norman Geisler, author of the Chicago Statement of 1978, formulated post-PhD from the Jesuit school, Loyola University, is the founder of Veritas Evangelical Seminary and founder of the International Society of Christian Apologetics. All of his board members of Veritas are also Calvary Chapel-related pastors or speakers and or board members of other Calvary chapels. So it seems to me you have one, and then you have another, but they're actually the same. The same guys are in control. Here's the International Society for Christian Apologetics, past president, Dr. Norman Geisler, PhD, Loyola University. Distinguished professor of theology and apologetics, Veritas Evangelical Seminary. There's his personal website, and where they have their degrees. Here's another one, Southern Evangelical Seminary. These are for the evangelicals. This is not Roman Catholic. Was founded in 1992 by Ross Rhodes, former evangelist and pastor of Calvary Church. There is cross-pollination here. Behind the scenes, the same powers are ruling. Southern Evangelical Seminary not only promotes Jesuit theology and agendas, but also has some professors that come from Jesuit schools. Who's training the world? We are accepting brass for gold. Protestantism has lost its anchor. Geisler is also involved with Calvary Chapel Bible College, promotes Bible apologetics based on reason, not based on the Bible. Is involved in counter-cult ministries and promotes Catholic evangelical cooperation. These people work behind the scenes. Here are Geisler's books, Jesuit-trained evangelical leader, Geisler's role in destroying evangelical Christianity in America, an article written by Rick Friedrich, January 2008. I always like to take these articles and to show you that even the stones are crying out. Even the stones. These are the evangelicals themselves who are looking at what is happening, and God has His people in many, many churches out there, and people are concerned. What does he write? Just looking at the back cover of the book and doing a little research on the names of those who recommend the book should say a lot. Just look at all the Jesuits and connection with Jesuits and their agendas. And remember that Geisler got his PhD from Jesuit Loyola University. While this may not bother some people, there is much more to consider. Needless to say, I now realize the agendas evangelical leaders like Billy Graham, Chuck Colson, and Geisler have had over the years, and why things turned out the way they did. It was very clever, and it worked. There are people out there that see it, but people within say, oh, the Jesuits, they don't play a role anymore. Forget it. Rick Friedrich continues. One final example is Frank Beckwith. He was the president of the Evangelical Theological Society. Evangelical. He was the president. Not a Catholic, apparently. And resigned to go back to Roman Catholicism. So they come and do their work, and then they go. And the people left behind have sacrificed their gold and embraced the brass. And they polish the brass, and they hold it out to display, and they say, look here, we've got beautiful gold, no, it's brass. Has this sort of thing not happened many times before? They pretend to be evangelicals, are raised up to high places, and then later show their true colors after they do their damage. But notice what the present president of that college, has to say in the introduction about such people and their defending the faith. He asks, why do people come so far to such a school? He says, for training under some of the top apologists and Bible teachers in the country to evangelize the world and to defend the historic Christian faith. Which historic Christian faith? Must be the Catholic one. Yet are not at least some of these men pushing for the Roman faith? These are stones crying out. And one finally rejoins it unambiguously. Here the president just goes back. Haven't we seen that so many times? Where is Christian apologetics at SES? What happened to defending the faith against the greatest enemy? As I have written elsewhere, the best way to beat the opposition is to create it and control it. That's brilliant. I thought that was a brilliant statement. So you create the opposition, but you actually control it. There is no opposition. It's all a ruse. It's all a lie. A word from the president, Dr. Alex McFarland. Why have hundreds of students come to Southern Evangelical Seminary from all over the United States and many other countries? Because they can get something here that they cannot get anywhere else. Namely, training under some of the top apologists, Bible teachers in the country to evangelize the world and defend the historic faith. We've read it before. The Catholic faith. In only a few years, SES has trained students from across the country and around the world. So people come from all over the world. They go to these evangelical colleges. They go back. They become mentors in their churches. And what kind of philosophy? Brass, not gold. Indeed, top theologians and apologists from around the country fly to Charlotte to help train a future generation. Who's training the Christian world today? another Jesuit for another gospel. What do Bill Bright, Campus Crusade for Christ, Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, Tim LaHaye, CNP founder, Left Behind co-author, Chuck Smith have in common? You know, these are people from the evangelical world that are asking these questions. And I think it is fair that we look at them. They have all benefited financially from Nelson Bunker Hunt. Now, who's Nelson Bunker Hunt? There he is. And there are all the organizations that are associated with him. Nelson Bunker Hunt is a business tycoon famous for trying to make a run on silver, and an equestrian, and something we've learned recently, a Jesuit, for the Order of St. Lazarus of Jerusalem. So the whole Left Behind series, all of this thing, all of this theology that is being swallowed left, right, and center by the evangelicals is Jesuit-controlled. Nelson Bunker Hunt is on the Council of National Policy, CNP. We'll see about that just now. President Executive Committee, CNP Senior Executive Committee, CNP Executive Committee, 1988. Heir of the Hunt Oil Company fortune, financial backer of CNP, CBS, JBS, etc. Name the organizations out there. The Jesuits have their fingers in those pies. Wallace Johnson, founder of Holiday Inns, financial institutions, religious institutions, worked with and funded Bill Bright's Campus Crusade for Christ, donating $15.5 million. I've had a number of run-ins with Campus Crusade for Christ. I preached in the University of Cape Town, and I preached lectures on creation and evolution, and who were the greatest opponents of those lectures? I would imagine the Department of Zoology, and the geologists would be the greatest opponents. No. Proponents of the Campus Crusade for Christ were the greatest opponents, because we have to embrace evolution. We have to give up gold. We have to embrace brass. Do some of our own institutions do the same thing? In 1967, Hunt formed the Christian World Liberation Front as a covert front for Campus Crusade, which split off and became a leading ministry in the Jesus People movement. Who's behind all these movements? This is not conjecture. This is actually what happens. And all these millionaires that he got together, and all the money that he collected for the Council of National Policy, and he's currently a member of the Council of National Policy. Now here is the Council for National Policy. I would like to know who these people are. Do they have any clout? Do they have anything to say? Running on their Jesuit money? CNP Foundation was founded in 1981 as a 501c3 non-profit educational organization by the Reverend Tim LaHaye of the Religious Roundtable, who was also the first CNP president. LaHaye, the right-wing evangelical political motivator and author of the Left Behind series. So there's the theology which fuels the world today. That theology which looks at literal Jerusalem. The original directors, as listed with CNP articles of incorporation filed with the Texas Secretary of State, were Howard Phillips, longtime conservative activist. And you can look at the names. We don't have to go into all the details, but let's go to their webpage. The Council for National Policy says, the Federal Observer, sorry, not their webpage. And it says over here, clothed in secrecy since its founding in 1981, the Council for National Policy is a virtual who's who of the hard right. Its membership comprises the right's Washington operatives and politicians, its financiers, and its hardcore religious arm. And because the CNP rules state that meetings are closed to the media and the general public. Our membership list is strictly confidential, should not be shared outside the council. The mainstream press knows virtually nothing about them. Don't even know who these people are. Early CMP members' directories were obtained by enterprising researchers, so we have some names. However, these revealed that the early leadership was in fact also represented in the Council on Foreign Relations. So this has to do with government think tanks setting up a new world order. And all of these organizations are controlled by who? Jesuits? Knights of Malta? The very organization of globalists to which the CMP was to be a conservative alternative. So they set up an organization supposedly opposed to the one that they separate from. So on the first board, there were no less than 3 and possibly more members of the CFR, the Council of Foreign Relations. Gilder, Board of Governors. Teller, Board of Governors. Van der Jacht, Board of Governors. Many of the CMP's highest ranking members also belong to the Masonic Knights of Malta. Who is in control? It's Rome. And we are blinded. And we see articles even in some of our magazines which says, let Rome off the hook. How can we let Rome off the hook if she's part of prophecy? So the members list is a veritable who's who of politicians, Federal Reserve, CFR members, numerous societies. Here's another web page. Spiritual Directors International. If you go to the website of Spiritual Directors International, you will find that their review panel is composed of Protestant Catholics, including a number of Jesuits and rabbis. This is a very learned community committed to the advancing of what? Spiritual direction around the world. Membership consists of people from many nations, many faiths. Spiritual Directors International provides programs and practices spiritual direction that promote sacred listening, spiritual guidance, spiritual accompaniment, and all of this stuff. Does it enter the echelons of every Christian denomination, including the remnant church? I believe so. It's there, it's alive, and it's run by the Jesuits. Again, I like it when the stones start crying out, because then it's not me saying it. These are people from the system. They are watching what is happening to their institutions. There are Christians out there, I want to tell you, who are better informed than those that should be informed. And I really want to share this with you, because this person was closely associated with Willow Creek, where hundreds of pastors are sent to for training, and they come back with their Willow Creek training, and they bring it back into all the Protestant world, including God's people at the end of time. And they come and preach a gospel which boggles the mind. Let's see what insiders, people not of our faith, are saying. Mary Fairchild, an active Willow Creek participant, wrote an article in which she discusses the state of Willow Creek and its teachings. The article is "Protestant No More. Willow Creek infiltrated by a mystic Quaker movement called Rehoboam." She wrote this in 2003 already. But the points she makes are as relevant today, no more so than they were then. Spirituality is not Christianity. That's a good start to an article. The written word of God gives Christians order and direction in living and worshiping together. God defines truth with His word. It is objective, authoritative, and sufficient. I want you to think about this woman and what she is saying. And then I want you to think about God's people exchanging gold for brass. having sent even hundreds of pastors to these very institutes for training. I testify to everyone who hears the words of the prophecy of this book, if anyone adds to them, God shall add to them the plagues which are written in this book. And if anyone takes away from the words of the book of prophecy, God shall take away his part from the tree of life and from the holy cities which are written in this book. Then she states, faith believes that if I obey God, everything will come out right in the end. If we obey God's word, God will take care of the results. Ecumenical evangelism advocates infiltration of liberal denominations and organizations rather than separation from liberal unbelief and error. That's pretty clear. God says, come out. It seems like this organization in which I was so involved says, no, let's come together. The Bible calls for separation from unbelief and worldliness. As long as the church has maintained her standard of separation, she has been wondrously blessed by God. Whenever she has compromised that standard and made unholy alliances with unbelievers, her spiritual strength has been sapped, confusion has resulted, and chaos has threatened. It happened in the history of Israel. The history serves as a type for our time. We're seeing it now. She writes, acceptance of traditions of other faiths is being taught. That's what Solomon did. Last fall's women's classes were equally disturbing in topics. Meditation techniques and the writing and traditions from Jesuits, the Quakers, and the Black Church are being mixed with scripture and New Age ideas. She even warns against lectio divina, divine reading, where the Bible becomes a spiritualistic tool where you babble the words without taking note of the content, when the reading becomes paramount rather than the understanding of what God is saying. And we will see later that the Pope is propagating this on a large scale. Well, we'll talk about these things later. Didn't agree with these meditations and the breath prayers. I warned her, she's warning the teacher of another course, that this form of meditation could open people up to the wrong spirit and hearing voices. An indicator of counterfeit faith that does not bring conversion is a desire to be saved from the punishment of sin, but not from sin itself. This is a stone crying out. Other indicators would include a desire for the blessings of Christ, but no desire for a relationship with Him, and a desire for the free gift of eternal life, but not with empty hands of faith. More indicators of counterfeit faith would include a desire for Christ as a priest to procure pardon and peace, but not as a prophet to instruct them or as a king to rule over them. I've said this hundreds of times. I've said hundreds of times, people want a savior, but they don't want a king. They want to be saved, but they don't want to obey. And finally, a desire for Christ that is only under the terms of their religious traditions and unbending philosophy. The Bible tells us that we do not know what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit Himself makes intercession according to the will of God. And then she quotes Romans chapter 8. Remember, Jesus always prayed and served according to His Father's will and purpose on each occasion. Now this is the confidence we have in Him, that if we ask anything according to His will, He hears us, and if we know that He hears us, whatever we ask, we know that we have the petition that we have asked of Him. So she quotes the scriptures, and when you pray, do not use vain repetitions. These people know this, and yet they do this. I'm stunned to see how this is coming even into our ranks. It's unbelievable, and from high sources. For they think that they will be heard by their many words, and she quotes Matthew. These people honor me with their lips, their hearts are far from me. She quotes Romans. They worship me in vain. And then she says, promoted writers and leaders of this movement are from the world councils. And then she says, they promote Richard Foster, and they promote Tilden Edwards, founder and director of Shalom, and they promote Palmer, And the Jesuits even promote these very same writings. So who has infiltrated these organizations? Ignatius Loyola. And they promote him. And they say one of the bloodiest times in the history of mankind, the Jesuits were probably the most cruel and fierce as they justified torture and murder for the church. Loyola's spiritual exercises were used by the Jesuits, and they would put themselves into a trance and levitate. She quotes what they were doing, and they say, why are they quoting these writers and telling us to study this? George Fox, founder of Quakerism's mother of feminism. The story of a Quaker woman in America with Margaret Hope Bacon, and she quotes all of this. Deep depression, hopelessness, perhaps out of his devotion to his overindulging and well-learned mother. He pushes a strong egalitarian movement and sets up women preachers as he twists scripture to make sense of his experience and explain his unscriptural choices. And then they quote Gilbert Bilexicon, and they say, egalitarians assert that women should be pastors, elders, and co-heads of families. They twist scriptures just like George Fox did to make this possible. And this is a woman writing. This is a woman writing in an evangelical organization, Willow Creek. And she takes all of these pointers and said, the church will take away the gold and replace it with brass, shine it up, put it under God, lock it up, bring it out for pomp and display, and say, worship. Do we want brass for gold? And all of these people's spiritual formation, that's part of the curriculum. She writes about the Jesuits and she states, Ignatius Loyola and the Jesuits, as his conscience troubled him deeply, he chose to earn his salvation by obedient service to the Roman Church and the Pope, rather than accept Christ's free offer of salvation. He soon planned to bring Catholic-turned-Protestants back to the Roman Church, which he thought was the kingdom of God on earth. And this is a very important point. Around 1550, the Jesuits began infiltrating every religion and denomination. Their job was to infiltrate and destroy churches other than the mother church. Before long, Jesuits had become teachers, professors in universities throughout Europe. Eventually, they started their own schools, colleges, and universities, and they pretend to be the evangelicals. We've just had a look at some of these things. They saw education as a way to serve the church by strengthening people who were already members and reclaiming those who had become Protestants. The Roman Church remained convinced that it was the kingdom of God on earth. We must look at that theology. And it saw the Protestant Reformation as a threat to that kingdom. The church determined to regain what it had lost and to put the whole world under its religious domination. Once and for all, they still infiltrate churches today. This is an evangelical writing. They also infiltrate many Bible schools, seminaries around the world, keep them from teaching the fullness of the Word of God. Education was and is used to reach others and strengthen their own, and their hallmark is the end justifies the means. Brass for gold? We are so naive. We think the world has changed. We think the churches have changed. We try to embrace the women, and we embrace Egypt, but in actual fact, we embrace brass. For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed them out cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water. And it shall come to pass when all these things are come, Deuteronomy 30 verse 1, upon thee the blessing and the curse which I have set before thee, that thou shalt call them to mind amongst all the nations, whither the Lord thy God has driven thee, and shalt return unto the Lord thy God, and shall obey his voice according to all that I command thee this day, thou and thy children with all thine heart and with all thine soul. That then the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity and have compassion on thee. I think the time has come. that we start speaking straight about these issues. And even if it causes a shaking, the straight testimony, we are told, will cause the shaking. And so, let us put our faith in God. Let us stand for the Word of God. And let us accept that when the Bible says that the kings of the world will give their power unto the beast, that is exactly what will happen. In spite of what anyone says, God's word cannot be broken. Amen.